it's Kayla back with another YouTube video. I'm nervous. I don't know why. Anyway, I wanted to do a part 2 to my where I've been preeclampsia journey. So I wanted to kind of start from not the beginning, but after I had Stetson. I don't think I really touched on like what preeclampsia is. And preeclampsia is basically your blood pressure rises and you have protein in your urine, and there's potential damage to your kidney and your liver. There's no reason why it happens. They don't have a lot of research on it, and I hope one day that there is, just for people like me who go through it and just don't know, why it happens or how to prevent it. But I just wanted to put that out there so everyone kind of knew like what preeclampsia is. So when I left the hospital on Sunday, the 25th of August, my nurses just sent me home. My blood pressure was back normal. It wasn't, they didn't seem concerned about anything else. So we went home, and on Wednesday, we had a new semi-normal for us, just a normal day. And I don't even remember what we did, to be honest. I think we just kind of ventured out and walked around a store, or, we live in a small town, so there's not really anything to do anyway. But we had gotten home, and I had preheated our oven, and we were gonna have dinner, and all of a sudden I had a headache. And this is a headache like I had never experienced. When I had preeclampsia the first time and I was in the hospital, I did have a headache. And one thing they always say is, if you see floaters, or if your head starts to hurt so bad you can't stand it, or there were a few other things that they always, every time they came in, they always asked me, but mainly was, do you see floaters? Which thankfully I never did. But anyway, I preheated the oven. I just sat down on the couch, and all of a sudden my head started pounding. And my husband looked at me and he was like, "Kayla, you need to check your blood pressure." And I had a cuff at home because I had already been monitoring it before I went into the hospital the first time. And I have a list of all my notes for what I would like to talk about. So if you see me looking down here, that's what I'm looking at. So I checked it, and it was 162 over 114. And they say that if, average blood pressure is 120 over 80. That's like the normal range. If you're above it a little bit, you're fine. If you're a little bit below it, you're fine. But average is 120 over 80. So when the Friday before, when I was in the hospital, or before I'd even gotten to the hospital, and they'd called me, they told me to monitor. If your top number gets above 160, or your bottom number is above, I think it's if your top number is above 150 and your, I don't know why I can't remember it. You need to go to the hospital, or you need to call like the after hours or your doctor, just whatever, depending on the time of the day. Anyway, my blood pressure was 162 over 114. And when I was in the hospital, if it was above those numbers, they would check, it would recheck itself in 10 minutes. So I didn't want to go back to the hospital. I had already had just a not good experience while I was there. So I just, wanted to avoid it at all costs. So 10 minutes later, I checked it again, and it was 173 over 113. So the top number had gone up, and I knew that I needed to go to the hospital. So we called the after hours nurse, and we couldn't get a hold of her. So we started to pack our bags. We just went on to the hospital. When we got there, which we live about 45 minutes away from our local hospital. So when I got there, I checked it one more time, and it was 188/94. So we went to the ER, and they, checked me in, and I went back to a triage room, and the first time they checked it, it had gone down to 156 over, I can't remember what the bottom number was. It all kind of happened so fast. So we were like, okay, maybe it was just a weird spike. It's going back down. So anyway, because of my preeclampsia to begin with, they were like, okay, well, we're gonna go ahead and bring you back to a room, and we're gonna just keep an eye on you and start you on magnesium just in case. So I went back to the room, and they did the cuff, and they started me on the magnesium, and before I even realized, it had just kept climbing and climbing, and my cuff kept going off and at one point, the nurse who was down there in the ER and my husband were both standing in front of me. And so if the hospital bed is like, this is the wall, all of the like computers and monitor things are all up here. So I couldn't see them from behind me, obviously. And my husband and the nurse were standing like at the foot of the bed. And I could feel the blood pressure cuff start to go off. And all I can just remember, I can see their faces as it stopped going off. So I was like, okay, cool. It's, it's done, whatever. And both of them stopped, and they both were just, wide-eyed, like something was wrong. And so I looked at them and I was like, what are you guys, like, what's wrong? What is it? And the nurse looked at me and she was like, I'll be right back, and walked out. And so I asked my husband, I was like, Caleb, what's wrong? And it was 221/117, which is extremely high. And when your blood pressure is that high, it can cause strokes, it can cause seizures, which is the eclampsia. I guess it's eclamptic seizures. So they took me, and I had a CT scan to make sure I didn't have a brain bleed or anything like that, just because, when your blood pressure is that high, that's the only thing that happens, basically. So they admitted me, and that was a Wednesday night, and I stayed until Friday. They got my blood pressure back to normal. I was on magnesium all day Thursday, and then Friday they took me off of it, and that's when I got to go home. But this time they did send me home with blood pressure medicine to have to take every single morning before I did anything, to make sure that my blood pressure stayed down. I continued to check my blood pressure morning and night until my 6-week appointment, my postpartum appointment. The one thing they didn't tell me when I left the hospital after I had him on Sunday, well, I had him on Saturday, but when we left on Sunday, they don't tell you about postpartum preeclampsia. And it was a 20% chance that I would develop postpartum preeclampsia. And I got it. So on October 7th, I had my 6-week postpartum appointment. And if you know anything about having a baby, you bleed. Typically, it could be 2 weeks to 6 weeks. It could be more than that. It just depends. Everybody's body is different. So I was still bleeding at my 6-week appointment. So they scheduled an appointment for a week later on the 16th for an ultrasound to see, if I was still bleeding at that point, which is about a week later. And I was still bleeding. So they did the ultrasound and they found a mass. They think that the mass was just like leftover placenta, or I guess it happens it's pretty common. But I had the ultrasound to make sure to see if that mass was still there. So that appointment on the 16th, they had, it was kind of this option of, we can give you this medicine, we'll put it into your uterus, and it kind of just, in that same sense that I had to do in the hospital, it kind of, in a way, it starts labor to try and get rid of that mass. And it's called Cytotec. You have to take some by mouth, and then they put some in your uterus. Sorry, TMI. And if that didn't work, then they would have to do a D&C, which I cannot remember what the D&C is called. But basically they go into your uterus and they scrape it clean and just get everything out. So I was terrified. So by that time my blood pressure had gone back to normal. I was off my blood pressure medicine, but now I was dealing with the mass and still bleeding. And so they did the Cytotec to try and get rid of that mass. And on the 21st of October, I went back and had another ultrasound, and the mass was still there. So they kind of were at that point where they were like, okay, let's just kind of see what happens. It's not dangerous unless you start to get a fever or chills or any signs of infection. So they weren't worried about it. But if something were to happen in that sense, then I would have had to have a D&C. So I also got a call on the 21st when we had gotten home, when he told us that the mass was still there. He called me back about 45 minutes later, my doctor, and was like, you, by the looks of your ultrasound, it seems that you have a biocornuate uterus, which, if you don't know, a uterus is normally like kind of like pear-shaped, kind of upside down pear-shaped, and a biocornuate is like a heart. So I had already known what that was because my sister actually has it, and it causes your baby to only be, one side as they're growing. So my niece her head was on this side and her feet were on this side, and she couldn't move. So I had already known what that was, and I had even, at my 8-week appointment, I had asked, my sister has this, I just wanted to see, make sure that it's nothing that I have, just to be aware of it. And at the 8-week appointment, she didn't say anything about it, but actually at our anatomy scan is when the ultrasound tech found it, which it seemed then that he was taking up all that room, so it wasn't a big deal. He was growing where he should have been. It was all fine. From that phone call on the 21st, he decided that he wanted to wait 4 to 6 weeks to see if I either stopped bleeding, because I did stop bleeding after the Cytotec, and if I stopped bleeding and then was fine and then started bleeding again, like a period, then he wanted to see me again, because what they do is a saline infusion ultrasound. So they go in and they basically put like a catheter of this saline, and they clear out your uterus, and they can see like the full shape of it. But we didn't have to do it. When we went to the doctor, he told us that he came in the ultrasound room and just kind of was watching and seeing and looking, and he basically said, you don't need to do the saline. We can tell that you have a septum, and when you have that septum, sometimes it causes miscarriages. And obviously, what we had been through, we wanted to do anything we could to prevent another miscarriage or anything at all. So he said, we do see your septum, like we can go in and we can shave it down and it won't be a problem, and hopefully we'll have no miscarriage issues or anything like that. But when we had the appointment with him, which was just right after the ultrasound, he came in the room and he said, the more I look at your ultrasound, I don't think that you need the surgery to shave down your septum. I think you're okay. So that was awesome, because I didn't want to have to go through a surgery. I didn't want to have to do anything else to cause my body any more damage at this point, until you know, we could figure out what else was going on. At one of my doctor's appointments, one of the doctors said that she wanted me to have a couple blood tests done to see if there were any underlying issues that we needed to kind of go over to see if that could cause any kind of issues. So we had the blood work done, and on the 29th we went in for an appointment. They checked for lupus, which I didn't have any signs of lupus. They checked my thyroid, which my thyroid levels were high, but they thought that they were coming back down. Or they think that they're coming back down. So there wasn't any issues with my thyroid, but they did do a test called the MTHFR mutation, which it's this big long thing that I couldn't tell you what it was. But basically you can have one normal chromosome and then one mutation from this MTHFR, or you can have one abnormality mutation and then another normal chromosome, or you can have both mutations. So I have the one normal and one mutation, which causes impaired methylation, and I'm going to read this because I don't know what it means. But it says process that takes place in the metabolism of folate, hormones, neurotransmitters, and waste. So basically my body doesn't produce that, or it doesn't break it down like it should, which causes, you know, all these issues that could potentially be why my placenta stopped working and why the preeclampsia developed and all that kind of stuff. So that was a good thing to find out. Because of that mutation, I have to take a different kind of prenatal. It supplements the methyl, whatever it is, methylfolate or methyl something, basically to improve it and try and get it to where it should be so everything goes the correct way. I don't think I'm explaining any of that right, but basically I have to take a certain special prenatal that will help with the development of a baby. So at that same appointment where she was telling me about the mutation, she did tell us that the doctors sent off my placenta to make sure that there was nothing else going on in there, and all signs of the placenta were pointed to preeclampsia, so that was a good thing. I do have a 25 to 65% chance to develop preeclampsia again, and a 21% chance to develop preeclampsia in the second trimester like I did the first time, which does, you know, if I develop it, there's a lifetime risk of stroke, heart disease, kidney disease, all kinds of things. We're at this point where we are finally done with, you know, the postpartum, and now we're at that point where we can grieve and kind of work through it. But we also have to make this huge decision of, you know, what do we do? Do we try again and risk the chance of losing another baby? And I know, you know, 25 to 65%, that's still 35% that it won't happen. And I am trying to look at it that way. But, you know, it's really hard to think positive when in every situation, you know, 1 out of 4 that had a miscarriage, and then I was the 20% that had postpartum preeclampsia, and I was, you know, it's just every single percentage statistic I have been in that lower part of it, and it's scary to think that it could happen again, and I don't know what the future holds, and I'm terrified, but on our own children, and it's terrifying to think that we could go through that all over again. But I know it's in God's hands. Whatever happens, happens. I had a client who is a labor and delivery nurse, or I have a client actually, who is a labor and delivery nurse, and I hope if you see this, you don't mind me telling this story, but I won't say her name, who she had a patient who was going through the same thing as me, and she was having a really hard time when she was in the hospital, you know, trying to decide, what do I do? Do I go ahead and have this baby, or do I, you know, just like my situation, it was me or both of us. There was no saving the baby. And she is very, very pro-life, and she had a hard time with it. And at 2 in the morning, she called her pastor, and he came into the hospital and he talked to her, and she was saying how she just didn't know what to do. And her pastor looked at her and said, you know, you don't get to make the choice. God has already wrote this story. Like, this book is already written. You just have to wait and see, you know, why, and the end half of your story. But, you know, God knew that this was going to happen. So there is no choice for you to make. And that has really resonated with me through the rest of this grieving process since my client told me that story. And I'm trying to remind myself every day that I don't have control over this, and only God knows what's going to happen. And as hard as that is to have to think about every day that I can't control it, it's true. And as much as it hurts to have to think that I could go through it again, it's not up to me what happens, it's up to God. And I try every day to pray about it and think of the positives of it, and just praise God every day that he didn't, you know, I know it sucks that he took my baby, but I don't know what would have happened if he took me. And clearly that wasn't in my story. And now we're finally on to our next chapter. I am terrified of what happens next, but all I know is that it's in God's hands, and I am thankful for that. So that is the end of my story. No, it's not. It's not the end of my story. This is the beginning of my story, or maybe the middle. I don't know. I don't know where my story is, but that is the end of this story for now. I'm just waiting it out. I also have a couple other things that I want to say, and that's thank you. Thank you to the people that have prayed for us, and thank you to my friends who have been there through it all. Thank you to my husband for being my rock and my shoulder. To my parents who unfortunately have gone through the same thing and with the same situation, and I couldn't have done it without them, and my sister, who also was there from the time I got to the hospital to the time I left, and to Mary Beth and Cody, who I work with, who have constantly asked how I'm doing and have sent flowers and just been there. To Allie, who is my best friend from hair school, who has moved away. She lives in Nebraska, but has been there every single day, constantly, you know, are you okay? What can I do? Who just had her own baby, who is living, you know, her life as a wife and a mom, and still finds a way to make sure I'm okay and check on me. And to Amber and CJ, who were freshly introduced to our lives just a few months before this all happened, and quickly became our family and our absolute best friends. And you know, it's funny because we literally had just started being friends, and they dropped everything they were doing. I found out last night that Amber was already on her way home. She was almost home, basically, when Caleb called and told her what was happening, and she turned around. She came all the way back to the hospital to get keys, to come home, to get our stuff, to turn around and bring it 45 minutes back to the hospital, and who kept our secrets through it all and didn't go run and tell anybody what was happening. And I'm just very thankful for them. I love you guys. I love all y'all for being there. I couldn't have done it without any of you guys. Thank you.